I would say the thing that was creating so much pain was not that I had some physical ailment or anything like that, but it was this belief that something was inherently broken or wrong about me. And that essentially ended up manifesting itself. And I think that speaks to the power of human belief. You give something enough attention and energy and belief, and it'll be so. And that was for sure for me in my situation. That was it.
Today's guest is the founder, chair and chief executive officer of Numinus, a company that empowers people to heal and be well through the development of delivery of innovative mental health care and access to safe, evidence-based psychedelic-assisted therapies. At Numinus, he guides teams leading strategy, innovation, research, and clinic network expansion, and supports the marketing and capital markets functions. He is responsible for raising more than 70 million for Numinus in the past year and is quoted widely in media such as CTV, Forbes, or the New York Times. Please welcome Payton Nyquvest. Welcome, Payton. It's so good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
The last time I saw you was 4 years ago, and you just started Numinus. 4 years went by, and a lot has changed.
Yeah.
And today I would love to talk about your story, what led up to this point, because, from the outside, people can think that, oh, it's for him, it's easy. And it's just like, probably he had good network or whatever. So I'd love to go back to your childhood.
Sure.
And just understand how was the situation for you back home.
Yeah. I so essentially since birth suffered with severe chronic pain, and that was at a very young age. It was interesting. I grew up in a household that had quite a lot of challenges, particularly around substance abuse, and from my first memories, there was this real passion for doing things differently. And that wasn't as like a judgment towards my parents, but it was a recognition. And I think because my chronic pain was so bad, a recognition that I actually had to do something different. I was trying to, live a better life, or trying to learn from, what was happening with my parents. And I just kept getting more and more sick. And that led, at a very young age to really questioning, am I even supposed to be here? Then when I was 12, my mom got sober, and it was a really impactful moment for me. My mom went to rehab, and after about 6 months came back home, and the first thing she said to me was that she was sorry, and that I should probably start talking to somebody. And I took that really seriously because of my chronic pain and how much I was struggling. And also, I watched the person that I love more than anything become the version of themselves that I always hope they could see for themselves, because she really, really focused on her own well-being, and that really deeply impacted me, and left me really, really passionate about exploring that for myself. And obviously with this, the volition that was attached to it was because of my chronic pain and how much I was struggling. And that led me on this sort of call it, sort of like a healing crusade of physical health, mental health, spiritual, really kind of diving very, very deeply into all of those things. But the challenge that I ran into was, no matter what I was doing, my chronic pain just kept getting worse. And that continued to lead me to a very disparaging and challenging place. And this sort of reaffirming cycle that I was in of like no matter what I was doing, I was continuing to be more and more sick, and really looking at like again, am I even really supposed to be here? Like is this a sign that I'm just not supposed to be here? And yeah, so that was a lot of my childhood, and I masked a lot of that by um as a kid, I was like, I was the happy, I had this smile on all the time, and I was always the jokester, and I was always trying to be that person, because I didn't want anybody to feel bad for me, because if someone felt bad for me, then it reaffirmed it and made it even more real. Like it wasn't like me avoiding it. It was like if more and more people knew what was going on for me, then it just becomes very, very real. And that was a very scary moment for me as well.
Wow. And I can imagine that the first time you realized that the life that you had or how you grew up is not normal, that was also an interesting experience, right?
Yeah. Well, and I grew up, I think a part of that too is I grew up, my family was, I had a lot of opportunities as a kid. My family was, financially stable. And so there was also this piece of like, I can't com I can't complain. I can't, I'm the kid that is, from the outside looking in, my life is good. I live a fortuitous childhood. I live a fortuitous life. And that also felt, I think there was also this part of me of like, maybe this is the pain that I'm carrying. Maybe I deserve to carry that because I live, a privileged life. And yeah, and as a young person, it's a confusing place.
And is this chronic pain is something that was you were born with, or is it something that just like developed throughout the years of living in this really turbulent and stressful environment?
Yeah, it was something that I struggled with since birth, but it continued to persist and get worse as time went on as well. And I think as I even as I became more aware of it, I think that again sort of like doubled down and reaffirmed those patterns as well.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I remember back then you shared with me that you have a brother as well,
Yep.
and Gabor Mate, usually you also know him well.
Mm-hmm.
Usually he says that no two kids are raised in the same family.
Yeah.
Is it true for your situation?
That's a really great question. My brother and I growing up, I really wanted to protect my brother from a lot of what I was dealing with, and we had a very different sort of experience growing up. I had a couple very challenging things happen to me when I was very young, around abuse, and as a part of that, it was also those were also things that I was trying to shelter my brother from as well, and so we had a different while we both certainly had our own challenges, our expression was maybe a little bit different. um and we went, him and I, we have a really, really beautiful relationship now, but we had to go through an interesting process of even kind of letting each other go. Like I remember when I moved out and he was still at home, um that was a really, it was a really hard time for us. It was the first moment of me caring for somebody, um and then having to let them go, and out of my own needing to take care of myself. So yeah, it's been an interesting path for both of us as well.
Yeah, and was your mother the person who told you to go on therapy?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
How did that make you feel when you were the one who was sober and the good one?
Yeah, it was interesting. Two things. One, I took it really seriously when I was young because I was struggling so much. Um, and there was resentment there, right? And I think it would come up in particular like when you get into the, therapy's not easy. And when you get into some of those hard periods or hard parts, there was this resentment around, why am I the one doing this work? And I think for me and my brother, that was probably where some of our path was different. He didn't spend as much time doing the therapy work that I did, and I think for me, anger was a really hard thing for me to express because as the oldest, there was also like I knew that anger wasn't going to get me anywhere. I knew that that was going to be just wasted energy. And so instead of externally expressing anger, I internally, expressed it and usually drew that on myself, whether it was being hard on myself, even, for me contemplating my mortality and whether something like suicide was the option for me. I think that's where a lot of that anger got directed towards because there was also a part of me that if I was fully owning, my own process, then nobody was in control of me. But I don't know if I had full control over myself or my emotions at that point either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting to hear your journey of how you learned to deal with your emotions and show them, because in the beginning you just mentioned that you had difficulties because you masked your emotions.
Mm,
And can you talk about that journey of just learning to open up and not just depress all your
mm.
feelings and frustrations?
Yeah, for me, going to therapy at a young age, it was never something that I hid. Like it was something that I would speak of, not that I was shouting it from, the mountaintops, but I had, I would tell my friends. There was a part of me that was really not shy about sharing some of that. And I think that was twofold. One was I saw a lot of friends who were struggling with things that I thought, could benefit from some of the things that I was doing. Um, and maybe more selfishly, I just didn't want to be the only kid in therapy. So I was hoping that more people would join. But, um, but that kind of like accountability piece was important for me growing up. I think because, again, I was trying not to rely on, um, maybe rely on the way things were going, and I was trying to forge this different way. um so that was a lot of what was behind that. And there was also, I think, for me, if I shared some of those things that I was doing, it also helped me stay accountable to them. Like if we, and I think that that's an important part of people, as much as people feel comfortable, and some people do and some people don't. But if you do feel comfortable, it's important to share, what you're doing and what you're dealing with and what you're going through, because it does create that accountability for yourself, but also, again, it's always inspiring for other people to hear those stories and things like that also. Um, but creating that accountability is important. And I think that's something that maybe gets missed a lot of the time in regards to people who are on a healing journey or something like that. Is it's easy, not easy, but there's a there's a kind of an avoidant way of like, yeah, you're seeing your therapist and you're doing all those things, but you're not telling anybody about it. Who's holding you accountable other than, obviously yourself? And that will express itself in one way or another. And I think, towards the end of my pain journey, that was a pretty big realization for me as well.
Yeah, and have you ever had a moment when you were like, I'm not doing therapy because it's just too much?
Every time.
Okay.
Every time you would always start a therapy session with like, what the hell am I doing here? Again. But similar to like working out, is I never left a therapy session wondering why I did it.
Yeah, and you started around 18. You were 18, right?
18 is when I started when I was probably 12, 13. But 18 is when I was in a really bad car accident. And at that point and it was my fault. And at that point in time, I realized, like, as much as I was trying to avoid falling into some of the pitfalls that, my parents had struggled with, um, at that point in time, during that car accident, I realized that something like really significant needs to change, and I really need to take full accountability for that. And so that's when, the sort of rubber hit the road, I would say.
And are you comfortable talking about that accident?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because when you shared that story with me, I was like, oh my God,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's just like so life changing.
Yeah. So I especially as a teenager, again, being the kind of happy go lucky life of the party type of kid, um, I ended up in a drinking driving accident. And it was, for me, the accident wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was, um, and the accident itself was a really horrible accident. I essentially passed out on the wheel and went off the road, and wasn't wearing my seatbelt, and fortunately nobody got hurt. But I remember that, kind of like, not that I needed an exclamation point, but throughout the whole accident, so I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, and I'm bouncing all over the car. And then when the car finally stopped, I went to get out of the car, and my head kept hitting this thing, and I was like, what is that? And I finally got out of the car, and I looked at the car, and I'd had a stop sign pole come through the front windshield and punch right through the headrest. And so if I was wearing my seatbelt, that probably would have killed me. And there's those moments in time where you're like, feels like someone's sitting on your shoulder. Um, and I think we all get those moments, and it's really, do we answer, like, do we recognize that and answer that call or not? And I went through that accident, and I had a police car drive me home, and my mom answered the door. And the feeling of, your mom, who has fought to be sober and stay sober and has done so, to then, have me show up at the doorstep in a drinking driving accident, was, to this day, like the worst feeling I've ever had in my whole life. Um and this sort of like the guilt and the shame, but also um just the recognition, like, how could I let this happen, right? And so that for me was really, I think, the thing that I realized with that accident was, I was doing all of this personal healing work at that time, but I was also like compartmentalizing and living this life of like this teenager that was partying and all of those kinds of things. And I think at that point in time, the recognition was like, I can't separate those two things. If I'm committing to like a certain way of life, and that's not to, you can have fun and do whatever with your friends and stuff like that, but you can't live in separation. You can't have like your healing and spiritual and all of that kind of life in one end of the spectrum, and then have all of your, other things on the other end of the spectrum. You have to, it all has to be a part of one journey. And I was fortunate enough to learn that at a very, very young age, and I'm still learning that. That's an ongoing, thing. I'm still human. I still find myself, there's always a new, place to look. But I think, and my hope is, I think societally we've recognized that we can't compartmentalize those things anymore. And, even with starting Numinus, like, I had so many people reaching out to me, who were executives, or, just people who have demonstrated the ability to manifest something and be successful at it, were reaching out to me saying, like, how do you bridge, like, and most of them had this sort of spiritual life, and then they had this job, right? And they weren't necessarily existing in the whole experience, right? They were these compartmentalized things. Um and I think people are really recognizing that you just can't do that. It's it's not sustainable. And my hope is that, you know, we continue to move closer and closer to that, because regardless of like what you do for a living, and I think that's like the big misconception, or sort of like the place that people fall into, is like, oh, if I live this spiritual life, then, you know, I can't be successful, or I have to give up my job, or I have to do all these things. And maybe, but not necessarily. Maybe all you really, really need to do is just shift your own being, and maybe that shifts an entire culture of the environment that you work in, or what have you. You know, we still, all of these different things that people are doing are important. But don't, you know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater as well. And I think that's where people get stuck a lot of the time. And you know, for me, I really contemplated professionally for a long time. You know, I had a career in finance and all of these kinds of things, and but never really felt like I fit into that. But also question, like, why was I successful there? Like, what was that experience for? Especially once I started Numinus. And all of the things that I experienced professionally have been able to serve me greatly in the success we've had with Numinous. And I'm grateful for all of that experience. And I'm grateful that I've been able to take that experience and use it in a way that feels in more alignment with myself and the things that I'm, you know, in service to.
Yeah. And you just mentioned your previous career before Numinous.
Mm,
You were really, really, really successful in that too.
mm.
Can you talk about that and why you ended up becoming a broker?
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, going through high school, school was a challenge for me, or like doing school work was a challenge for me. I was entrepreneurial through high school, and I think I always struggled with like the businesses that I was doing, or stuff like that in high school. I was always like, well, I can make more money doing that than I can spending time doing homework. And so, you know, barely got through high school. And my dad worked in finance, and I kind of grew up in that industry. And I love the interaction with people, like how people oriented it was. And I loved the part that I always really, really loved and enjoyed also was the ability to like work with so many different companies and different sectors, and it was always changing, and it was the ability to learn and like absorb information was really interesting to me. So I got into the finance business when I was 18, and you know, went through lots of peaks and valleys in regards to that, but was fortunate enough to be quite successful at a young age. Obviously, you know, because I had family members that were in that business, I had opportunities and doors open for me, but I really also wanted to do it my way. And I was always sort of like the anti finance guy. You know, I always say like I got my tattoos before I started Numinous, and I really sort of prided myself. I think in particular because people, as a young person who comes from a family who's been in the business, I think people expected me to be a certain way. I think they expected me to be the silver spooner partier type of person, and I very much tried to be the opposite. I was always the first person in the office, and I wasn't the, you know, party all night, work all day type of person. And as I continued to be successful in that place, I ended up um, being a part of a group that bought a control position in a smaller independent brokerage firm, which we then sold to one of the larger independent brokerage firms in Canada. And I actually ran that office, and I was a director of the Cross Canada firm at 30 years old. And we had a lot of young, successful people who worked for us, but my way of managing them was actually not to take them out and do the party thing. It was to connect with them personally and see how they were doing and see how I could support them. Um, so that was a little bit of like a rarity, I would say, in that industry. And But what was interesting for me throughout that whole process as well was also my chronic pain continued to persist, and it was actually sort of the more professional success I was having, the sicker I was actually getting. And um that was really, really challenging. And another thing, professionally, something I felt like I couldn't share with people, something that I tried to hide or keep private, because I was in this leadership perspective or leadership position, and I didn't want people to think that something was wrong with me. And so that was really, really hard.
What was the moment when you realized that you cannot keep doing this because something is just off, despite
Yeah.
all the therapy and everything
Yeah.
that you've done for yourself so far?
For me, like what the symptoms would look like would be, it would start it so it was severe, it would start as severe gut pain, and in a half an hour it would turn into just like, the best way I can explain it is just like the overwhelming experience of pain, just all consuming pain. Um and if I didn't get to a hospital in time, the most logical answer would be to take my own life. And I remember I had this like way that I would drive home every day, and I'd be at the office and I would feel it start to come on, and I knew that I had to come home. um and I remember, so I would drive over Lionsgate Bridge, and there's a point in the bridge, and I would drive by this point and I would always think, if I couldn't make it to the hospital, that would be the point that I would take my car off the bridge. And it was always this race to try and get past that point. And so, in one time in particular, this pain came on, and I'm racing home, or I'm racing to the hospital, and I get to the hospital, and that week was probably the worst attack that I had. And it also happened to be the most successful week of my life. And so I spend pretty much that whole week in and out of the emergency room, and it's the most successful week of my life. And I have all of these people messaging me saying, you know you must be so happy. Like, people knew what was going on for me at that point in time professionally, and so people were messaging me saying, you must be so happy, or how are you celebrating, and all this kind of stuff. And nobody messaged me just saying like, how are you doing. Like, nobody just gave me that message. And I remember being in the emergency room and just thinking, like, if this is like if this is the success that I'm striving for, is then forget it. Like, I would give every single piece of like perceived success that I have, back, just so that I didn't have to be in the hospital anymore. And that was really the sort of turning point for me. And um at that point in time, I'd researched psychedelic therapy for a while, and I'd never had a psychedelic experience because of my parents', history with substance abuse and stuff like that. But I was out of options. I felt like I'd tried everything. And um while I was in the hospital, I said to Victoria, who now is my wife, I said, you got to trust me, but I have to do something drastically different. And I booked a flight while I was still in the hospital, and got on a plane and went to go do ayahuasca for the first time. And that was really the turning point for that period in my life. Yeah.
Was it difficult to just let everything go and be there? Because some people like myself, I would
Yeah.
be like so control freak maybe that I would be
Yeah.
like, oh my God, what's gonna happen?
It's a good question. I think I was so done. Like, I remember because my pain was so bad, and I think in a, in a lot of ways my chronic pain is the best thing that's ever happened to me, for my personal development. I would say now the second best thing that has happened to me. I have a daughter, so that would be, and I would have to say my wife probably as well. So couple of better things, but it was without my chronic pain, and I think about this regularly, like would I have arrived at where I've arrived at today? And um, I think I was so um, at the end of my rope. And I remember being on the plane flying to go to the retreat center, and I had to deal with myself. I said either this is gonna work or I'm done.
And
And
did you get sick on the plane?
so I was still sick from the hospital on the way down, and trying to manage it. I had a couple of like different things and techniques to try and just get myself down there, and managed to get myself down there, but with this sentiment of like either this is gonna work or I'm punching my ticket, and that's it.
Seems like it was a really formative experience because you were like literally fighting for your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you were talking about, you mentioned ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk about your first experience?
Yeah. So I get down to a center in Costa Rica, and the you have all of these like you watch the YouTube videos, you hear the stories, and my experience wasn't like any of those things. And in particular, we did four ceremonies, and the first two ceremonies were nothing like what I had read, and I started to get very fearful of it's not working, or something is like I'm broken. I'm broken beyond repair. And really, I would say halfway through that retreat was in a really, really, really challenging spot. Um, but we went into the third ceremony, and essentially, what I had to come to terms with was that what if there's actually nothing to fix? What if what my experience is just exactly what my experience as a human is supposed to be? And growing up with that condition, I'd always believed that something was wrong with me, that needed fixing. And kids, that the kids should never have to grow up that way. Kids are, babies are perfect. There's they're um it's their experiences and stuff like that, and our experiences that make us feel otherwise. And so I was sitting in that ceremony and essentially having to come to this place of real compassion and gratitude, and not like compassion or gratitude with like a, and if I get there then maybe something will happen, but just like a full acceptance that um there's nothing to fix, and that this pain experience that I'm having is just a part of my experience, and that's it. And that was the ceremony that changed. I mean, that was the ceremony that changed everything for me. And um I got out of that at ceremony. We had one more, and at the end of that retreat I knew that it was gone, and I never had a bout with chronic pain since then. Yeah.
I'm sure that there are so many people having that kind of experience of having that gut pain and chronic pain,
Mhm.
and to
Mhm.
hear that there's a way out of it, it's
Mhm.
refreshing. But I also know that you've done so many other things. So it's not just the ayahuasca. So I think that's
Yeah.
something that is also important to tell.
Well, and that was the big realization, and I say this a lot of the time, but that was really when the work started. It wasn't like the end of the work. That was really the beginning, or the next phase of it. And the part, frankly, that was even harder for me was I go through this experience, and I have friends and family and like teams of doctors and all of these people who know me as Payton who suffers with chronic pain. And I come back after a week of being away and it's gone. And how do I tell people about this? How do I, I remember like going to see one of my doctors, and I went to go see him and I was like, I don't have to be here anymore. And this is a person that I've seen like on a free like a multiple time a week basis for years. And it's just, and I don't have to be here anymore. And I couldn't explain to him,
Oh my God.
you know, why or how, other than to try and explain my experience, which makes me feel like, a crazy person. But he could also tell that it was gone. And but that was a very scary moment in time for me because I didn't have anybody to connect to or talk about. And it felt, while the pain was gone, there was also this fragility to this like newness for me. I'd never lived, since the day I was born, I'd have this thing that was going on. And so it's like, it's like a baby learning how to walk again. And so that was a really lonely, kind of scary moment in time for me. And fortunately, I had the energy and commitment to like really seek out community and support. And also fortunately, I had done so much personal work before that at least I had like a scaffolding, and I had like a thing to fall back on to keep doing the work. And a lot of people don't. And that's for me like a cautionary note for people looking to do psychedelic work is um the amount of resourcing and the amount of like commitment and tools that you need to have in order to really be able to go through these extremely significant experiences are so necessary. Because the other side of that is, say you have one of these huge life-changing sort of experiences, which many people do. If you fall back into those old patterns again, that is a very scary place, because then you go, I've had the big experience. I got the message. I got the insight. I had the alleviation. And now I'm back in the same place I was before. Um, and so, for people who are curious about that, my encouragement always, and frankly, why I created Numinus was not just to provide access to psychedelic therapy, but more importantly, or equally importantly, to provide a community and a platform that people can go back to and continue to engage with, so that they are supported through that. And that, I think I just can't understate the importance of having that support.
Yeah, so you basically created Numinous, the thing that was missing from your
A
life
hundred
when you
percent.
came back from
A
your
hundred
ayahuasca
percent.
trip,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And do you remember the moment when you probably landed and maybe a couple of weeks in,
Mm.
you already had the idea of Numinous, or what was the story?
It was interesting. I came back, and really all I wanted to do was give back to something that saved my life. And I remember even like flying, and this will be an interesting story, but I flying down when I'm on the plane down to Costa Rica to go do the ayahuasca ceremonies. There was this part of me that was like, well, if this all goes like according to my plan, which it never does, maybe this is something I could be involved with or help support. Because I really, at that point in time, I really did feel like what I was doing professionally was not serving me well. And so I had this sort of like curiosity. Um, and we do the last ceremony, and there's like 90 people down at this retreat center. And at the end of these retreats, everybody's ready to like quit their jobs and become yoga instructors or whatever, and wear crystals and all this kind of stuff. And I get this message in the last ceremony, which is essentially, um this is too important for you to be involved with, so leave it alone. And it was a very sobering moment for me, and a confusing one. And so I go, everybody's telling everybody what they're going to be doing, and meanwhile I've kind of had ayahuasca tell me to, you know, to bugger off. And so I go back home and I say, you know what, I completely hear that message. I don't have to get involved. I just want to give back to something that saved my life. That's it. I just want to pay a debt of, like a debt of gratitude, and that's it. And I start trying to figure out, you know, where's a place that I could maybe donate some money or something like that. And within 3 weeks, I was talking to Health Canada and I was meeting with MAPS, and there was so much momentum behind these conversations I was having. And people kept saying the same thing to me, which is, you should try and get involved and do something here. And I kept saying, well, ayahuasca told me to 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 bugger off, so I'm not going to. And I kept having people within the community saying like, no, we're in the community, and universe is sort of hitting you over the head with a sledgehammer. And so after a couple of months, I actually I did the only thing that felt like the right thing to do, and I went back to go do ayahuasca again and ask the question directly. And I went back down and had even more challenging ceremonies, um, but learned, a lot of insights around integrity um, and the the reverence and commitment that it really takes to do something in this space. And that was really important to me. And on the last night, so my Victoria, my wife, ended up coming down with me the second time around. And on the last night, there's sort of like this crew change where like half the 90 people leave and half of like the next 90 people show up. So you have this like one dinner that is essentially like an overlap. And we're walking to dinner on that last night, and I have all these insights, and it feels kind of like the permission, or the thumbs up to do something in the space. And but as we're walking to dinner, I'm really struggling with that, because I'm kind of going like, well, is that like my ego just telling me what I wanted to hear? And did I really get those, were those insights really accurate, and all this kind of stuff? And but the other thing that came up was I kept feeling like I needed to reach out to Gabor Mate, who's someone who we both know. And I'd never met Gabor before. I knew that he lived in Vancouver. And for whatever reason, I had this really strong calling to reach out to him. And I said this to my wife as we're walking to dinner. My wife is like used to me saying, kind of off the wall kind of things like that. And she's kind of like, yeah, whatever, let's go get dinner. And we get to dinner and we sit down, and Gabor Mate's daughter is sitting beside me at the dinner table. And I was kind of like, okay, like maybe that was like the final thumbs up that I needed. And we had this beautiful dinner. We actually never spoke about her dad once. We just spoke about our own experiences and why we were there and all this kind of stuff. And we exchanged contact information. And I get home and I get an email from her like a couple of weeks later saying, I think you should maybe have a conversation with my dad. And I said, okay. And so we went for coffee, and I credit a lot of why Numinus exists today to Gabor, and the support and advice that he's given me. And it really, his guidance and support, and the conversations we had really helped me understand what I wanted to commit to in regards to like what I wanted Numinous to be. And it was again this commitment, and there was so much, and to this day there's still so much excitement around psychedelics, and I think that that's wonderful. Um, but this piece around how do we integrate these experiences, and how do we make sure that we're not, it's not about the experience. The experience is the kind of catalytic event that allows for us to then integrate that experience and live better, more aligned, healthier, happier lives. And that is really what I wanted to create. And because I had an actual experience of that, I also had this sort of like reference point of, you know, I and I've experienced this many times with Numinus going forward is, as you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, we've raised a lot of money. We've got a lot of people who have a lot of kind of opinions of what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And anytime I get confused about that, I have my own personal experience that I can refer back to and go like, and not that I'm saying what worked for me works for everybody. Everybody's different. But I do have this experience of like, when I'm confused or when I'm trying to make important decisions, I can reflect back on that and go like, what would I what would I would have what were the things that I could have used, or what would I have wanted as a person who was really a patient first. And that's been hugely beneficial in creating Numinous and getting it to where it is today.
As I'm listening to you, what I was thinking, have you ever asked Gabor about your ayahuasca experience? What's his opinion about that? Because, I always have these really deep conversations with him, and his insights are always so different than anything that I've ever heard. And it's so useful and helpful, and I
Yeah.
can integrate.
Yeah.
I'm just interested. What was his?
Gabor's great at telling you things that but that you maybe are not fully paying attention to. And in regards to my own personal experience, I would say the thing that was creating so much pain was not that I had some physical ailment or anything like that, but it was this belief that something was inherently broken or wrong about me. And that essentially ended up manifesting itself. And I think that speaks to the power of human belief. You give something enough attention and energy and belief, and it'll be so. And that was for sure for me in my situation. That was it.
And what did he say about the message that you got during this ayahuasca session?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's still an advisor to Numinous to this day. So, he.
Because, I'm just interested that probably you've shared this experience with him, and maybe he was like, maybe it's like your thoughts manifesting in that kind of message, or some fears around.
Yeah, I think it was fears, but I also, to be totally honest, I think I had to go through that process. I had to go through the process of what's of like self inquiry of like what is really driving me to want to do this, right? I think lots of people have really really good intentions, and we've seen this in the psychedelic space now, right? Where it's gone through a period of huge success and lots of people raising money and all this kind of stuff, and now it's actually the opposite, where a lot of companies are folding, and it's been really hard in the space. And I don't think any of those companies had poor intentions necessarily, but I think money can't buy wisdom or experience. Wisdom's earned and experience is earned. And I think a lot of the times you know, we correlate like financial success with like, oh, they must know something we don't, or they must, and in some cases maybe, but more often than not, financial success is a moment in time where frankly effort and luck coincide with one another. And hopefully it's a good idea that, coincides with all of that, and then it does something, sustainable and successful. Um but I think, for myself, that learning that and that opportunity to have those experiences is really, again, what's kind of made Numinous sustainable and successful. But I think for, the conversations that I've had with Gabor in particular, and reflecting on my own kind of pathway with this, I think there was this need for a deeper inquiry of and space to like let it be successful just for me, right? A lot of the times we're very quick to take something that was good for us and immediately want to like do something with it, or immediately want to like give it to other people, or immediately, want to monetize it. And that was a big learning for me. And to be honest, if I'm very, very grateful for what's happened with Numinus and my own life, but I was still probably too quick to like not let myself just receive, you know, what I'd received in the healing that I got with ayahuasca. And I think, that if from Gabor's point of view, or at least, the couple conversations we've had about that, and in my own reflections, we all have that intuitive inner knowing, and sometimes it speaks to us in a way that, will listen. And I think that's probably what my pain was too. It was my body and spirit speaking to me in a way that, I finally started to listen.
And can you talk about that journey of like getting to today? Because I remember 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about all of these challenges and big goals.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
4 years went by, and I've read so many articles about you and Numinus.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what has happened?
Yeah, it's been honestly, when I started Numinous, I could have never have thought that it would have just gone through what it's gone through. And especially at a time with the pandemic, like it's been this constant, like I don't have to look very far to look for motivation to do what we're doing. And but for how, and I think, a couple of things going back to this whole idea of like financial success, right? We raised a huge amount of money when we were still a very, very small company. And now, with almost 20 locations, we served 20,000 people last quarter. And and the financial environment's never been more challenging. And so but through all of that, it's been amazing to see. The one thing I was concerned about when we started was just, were the things that we were really standing for, were those going to get recognized as important or necessary? Things like integration, things like ongoing care, preparation. Um, and they have been. And not only have been, but they've proven to actually be a very necessary part of the financial sustainability of this work. And I'm very grateful for that, because it makes it get prioritized and be important. And but it's been a roller coaster. I mean, it's been everything from, the personalities that come into the space to the cultural, it's now everywhere you look, there's mushroom this and psychedelics having this big cultural moment. But I think also more importantly is, I think people are really, the there's a really, really desperate need for a really, really big shift in how we think about healing, wellness, healthcare. And unfortunately, in a time where, and COVID's only greatly exacerbated this, but it doesn't matter whether you're talking about suicide, anxiety, depression, substance use disorder. These are all things that the numbers continue to go up. And we're getting to this point of like, we know the way we're living is not working well.
Mhm.
And again, grateful that we can be doing our part.
And have you got the chance to connect with influencers in this space, or influential voices, I rather say, like Tim Ferris or
Yeah.
Aubrey Marcus?
Mm-hmm. I have. And I think we probably all share the same sentiment that just it's here and it's happening, and it's also really big. Like and when I say big, I mean it's going to take a lot um to make this really sustainable and effective and lasting for people. And so, there's this sort of like cautious excitement and optimism, I would say. And I think we're at a fragile time. I think, you look at what happened with psychedelics in the 70s, um, huge cultural movement, and unfortunately, it kind of got over its skis a little bit, and then it, ended up in, Schedule 1 regulation, and a lot of really, really important research was shut down for almost 50 years. And I think we just have to be really cautious and intentional about how we continue to steer this forward. And again, I think it's happening. It never feels, it's funny. Like, people say to me all the time, like, "Oh, Health Canada is moving too slowly, or regulators are moving too slowly." But, again, to our conversation, it's like in 4 years, a huge amount of change has happened. And I think we just have to keep that into consideration as we move forward.
Can you talk about some changes that you are the most excited for?
Yeah, I mean, I think so one thing in particular that we're very, very excited and grateful to be able to be a part of, there's an organization called MAPS, who is really the reason why psychedelics are where they are today. They've been doing clinical trials with MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder, for over 35 years now. And they anticipate this time next year that treatment being available legally for people. And they just posted not that long ago their phase 3 clinical trial results that showed, and these were people with treatment resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. So they're people who have tried every other mode of treatment and hasn't been successful. And with the phase 3 clinical trial results showed 67% of participants saw significant clinical, or sorry, over 80% of participants saw a significant clinical reduction in their symptoms, and 67% actually no longer met the PTSD criteria after 3 treatments. So essentially cured their PTSD. And we don't have anything that's even close to that effective. And that for me is a very exciting moment, and we're extremely excited and grateful to be able to be working alongside MAPS to help bring some of that work forward.
And the last 4 years, a lot has happened. What is the success or something that you achieved that you're the proudest, probably?
I would say the thing that I'm probably most proud of with Numinus is kind of how I hear us like being received in the community and what we're doing. We've been very intentional about our reputation and our brand and what we stand for, and I'm very, very proud of that. I'm very proud. There's been a lot of moments where it's been hard for the team to really like step into that, because there's been so many opinions or different things, showing up that could have altered us off course. And we've really stuck to, what we believe to be true and what we want to stand for. And I'm very proud that today, we're recognized for that. And we've really done that by prioritizing the clients, the people who come through our doors, and the practitioners who do the really, really hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just saw this morning that you shared an article about what is going on right now. Like, what's your goal? Can you talk about that? Because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, around training.
Yes.
That is the biggest sort of bottleneck, or the biggest need that that I think everybody in the space sees at the moment is we need tens of thousands of trained therapists to be able to do this work. And it's not a weekend cursory course that people need. It's a lot of training. And we have significantly, um, we're under resourced as an industry in regards to being able to have those therapists trained to be able to do this work. And so that's a big commitment on Numinus's part, is to provide not only the training, but the environment and support for practitioners who are doing this work, because it is very different than what happens in traditional healthcare and wellness at the moment. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm really curious about what type of a leader you are when it comes to Numinous.
I would say for me, leadership is remembering who you're serving ultimately at the end of the day. We have a lot of different people, different personalities. different lenses that everybody looks at what we do from. And I think leadership from a authentic and vulnerable place, especially these days, is needed and necessary. And I'm not perfect, but I try to lead from my own experience and share my own experience. And I think it's important that we share good times, bad times, and ask for help. I think a lot of the times leaders don't ask for help, and um, we have to bring in that humanness if we want to do so in a sustainable way. I think that's extremely, extremely important.
And what do you do to maintain your mental well-being?
Yeah, I kind of split it into two categories. So I have my first category. I have like not I call them like non-negotiables. So like things I have to do every single day. Um, I have a morning meditation, and it's the first thing I do when I wake up is a meditation, and the last thing I do before I go to sleep is a meditation. I do a journaling after my morning meditation. um, I get in cold water every single day, and and those are sort of like my must do's. And then I would say, the things that I try to commit to every single day, but if I can't get there, I don't beat myself up about it. Some kind of physical exercise, some kind of just getting outside, some grounding space. I have a daughter, so trying to spend as much time with her as possible as well. And I still to this day I have therapists that I work with every single week, and I continue to be committed to my own healing work. I think the thing I love about healing work is there's no finish line. I've yet to meet like the healed person. It's a journey, and for me, that continued ability to. I think a lot of the times when people think about going to see a therapist, it's this like something's really wrong with me that I really, really need to fix. But we all like life happens. We all have stuff. And I can it's sort of similar to like, we all know physical exercise is good for our bodies. And I think we need to look at therapy the same the same way for our minds and our well-being. Is we've got to find a place where we can work some shit out a little bit. And I think my hope is that more people feel the openness to be able to do that.
And what advice would you give to people who are suffering right now?
Ask for help. Yeah, the biggest thing is just reach out and ask for help. I could have never expected the journey that like finally really, really, you know getting on my knees and asking for help has brought me to. Um and for people just to reach out, like don't think you're a burden. Even if you don't have a lot of people feel like maybe financially they can't commit to it, you will always be overwhelmingly surprised of what happens if you just reach out and ask for help.
Yeah. And I only have one more
Yeah,
question. And I really enjoyed this
me
conversation.
too.
Oh
Thank
my
you.
God. I loved how you opened up so
Thank
much.
you.
Oh my
Thank you.
God. So, this is a question I ask from everyone.
Sure.
How did you define success when you were 20? And how do you define success now?
When I was 20, I probably defined success as um, whatever whoever the people I was trying to impress, whatever they would have thought was impressive is probably how I would have defined success. Um, Today, I would define success as if I can look in the mirror at the end of the day and know that I did my best. Um, both for myself and whatever I put energy into, I think that's success. I think being able to feel proud of yourself, um, and accepting and loving of yourself. I think that that's what success is. And yeah,
Thank you so much, Payton.
thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.